Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you may be. I'm Jared Bollman, your host for Biblically Speaking, and this is our Wednesday devotional, A Walk Through the Word. And today we're going to be looking very quickly at one moment that changed the life of one young man in a very drastic way. And we're going to do it right now. Now, our text this morning is going to come from Luke chapter 15 in that series of three parables on lost things. And of course, you know what they are: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and of course, the prodigal son, the lost son. And we're going to be looking at that third one, obviously, because we're talking about a young man, and focusing on just one aspect of that story. But I want to paraphrase it just for time's sake. That if you don't know the story, that basically Jesus is telling a parable about a father that has two sons. Apparently, he's a very wealthy man, and the younger of the two comes to his father and says to him, "Father, I want the portion of your goods that's going to belong to me. Basically, give me what you're going to give me after you die." And the father takes a couple of days and he gets that together and he gives it to the young man, and the young man takes a couple of days and then he leaves home and he goes off to the far country, and where the text tells us that he engages in riotous living, and that's some sort of debauchery, probably all the things that his dad had told him: don't go into these things, don't do these things, don't go these places, or be around these kinds of people. Well, he very quickly burns through all of the inheritance that he has. He hasn't used this wisely at all. Instead, he's been spending it on the people around him, and even the older brother accuses him of wasting his father's money with prostitutes. Well, after he's gone through his money, the next thing that happens is a famine comes through the land, and here he is, a stranger in a far country. Nobody's wanting to take care of him, and he needs a job. So we can likely assume that because Jesus is telling this parable to a Jewish audience, that we're supposed to assume that this is a Jewish boy or a young man, and he finds himself in the position of the only job that he can find is feeding the swine, the pigs, of one of the people of that land. So he's feeding unclean animals, and he's not even making enough to survive. He's not even making enough to eat. The text tells us that he was jealous of what the swine were eating and would have gladly filled his belly with the husks. And what we know from that is basically that's not even like nutrition that's going to keep you alive. That's just things that are going to stave off the feeling of hunger. And that's where we're going to pick up the story. That beginning in verse 17 of Luke 15, the text says, "But when he came to his senses," so he had been away from right thinking there, "but when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I'm dying here with hunger?'" So that's the realization. I'm dying with hunger. There's people in my father's house that are not me that have more than enough bread. So I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men.' So he got up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out the best robe and put it on him, put a ring on his hand, sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.' And they began to celebrate." So I want you to see sort of the change in this young man. That the first thing that we can learn from this parable is that before he came to himself, he had to find himself somewhere where he really shouldn't have ever been. And many of us today who are members of the family of God have found ourselves at some point in our life in places where we just didn't belong. And maybe we even look at this and go, "How did I get here?" And of course, when you ask that question, you realize that I'm the one that brought myself to this position. That's one of the huge problems that with the modern day sort of seeker sensitive religions that are out there, that they never ask that question of repentance. It's always about the emotion of the healing and not the genuineness of the repentance. That he knows why he's there. And he knows that there is not where he needs to be. And he can see the contrast. If I can just make it back to dad's house, then I know I don't have the right to ask to be his son, but I know that I won't starve to death. It says he came to himself. It says this is something that he recognized about his relationship with his father. And so he gets up. Second thing he does, he gets up and he goes to his father's house, and he has this epiphany as he's making this journey that he's going to ask to be a servant. It says, "Make me as one of your hired men." I think the King James renders that, "Make me a servant." It occurs to me that that's what we really want to be. That sometimes I think we think that serving is beneath us, but it ought to speak to the nobility of being a servant of God and a child of God. That Jesus came in the form of the Son of God. He put on the likeness of men to be the Son of God. But then Philippians 2, Paul tells us that he not only came in the likeness of man, but he became a servant, and that he died the death of a humiliating death, even death upon the cross. That it shouldn't be any humiliation for us to say to God, "I don't deserve to be your child. I just want to serve." Because that's exactly what his son said. "I just came to serve and do the will of my Father." And if we're going to find this road to repentance, it's not about coming to God and asking Him for blessing. It's not about coming to God and asking Him for healing. It's about coming to God and seeking how we can be used in His kingdom. Now, the wonderful thing about this, and I'm going to do a podcast, I haven't decided who the guest is going to be, but I'm going to do a podcast on each of the three individuals in this parable in not too many weeks. But the wonderful thing about this is that the father, when the son comes home, doesn't receive him like a servant. He's excited. He says, "Bring me my robe, my sandals, my ring. Put those on him and go." And that calf that we've been saving for a special occasion, this is that occasion. Go kill the fatted calf, because my son was dead and now he's alive. So he doesn't receive him like a servant, even though he doesn't deserve to ask to be a servant. He receives him like a son. And friends and neighbors, that's one of the wonderful blessings of God. It doesn't matter how far you are from Him, it doesn't matter how deep into sin you have gone, that when you choose to come to the Father, He doesn't receive you as anything less than His child. And so, wherever you're at today, find the humility, open your eyes to realize that serving God will be better and more blessed than the sin that's enslaving you today. And if you are a servant of God, if you are His child, be welcoming to those that are coming out of sin and back into your Father's house. Because in the end, none of us deserve to be here. We all came seeking to be servants, and we've received better than we ever deserve. Well, that's our discussion for today. If you want more of this kind of Christ-centered content, be sure to hit the subscription button, the notification bell, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you'd like to have an episode on. Maybe we can do one together. But as always, have a good day, and God bless.